the relatively rapidly. Okay, relatively rapidly to me. As I also allude to, that we may cover a fair amount in a limited period of time as you type the right zippily. But the idea here is I want to give you as much time as possible to meet in your groups because your hearing is next week. Okay? And actually, so all of the topics today are important, but they're actually easy to cover pretty, get to the point pretty succinctly. Okay, so it's not quite as much law as we've had the last 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so first of all, concept of vested rights. Okay, so what we're talking about today is what happens when there are changing conditions, urban conditions, land development conditions, such that the local government feels the need to adopt measures to try to control growth in some kind of way. Okay? So they're trying to manage it, and it may not, it may be sprawl, or it might be something more narrow. It might be something aimed at a particular type of use or at a particular area. But the idea here is that the sort of underlying theme is that the government is making some sort of changes or adopting some sort of measures to try to limit certain uses. Okay, so vested rights is about whether a landowner has the right to have the existing or the old zoning applied to their development project when the government changes the zoning on them. Okay, so they've started proposing, at the very least, proposing a development project, and then the government changes the zoning in such a way that does not allow that development project or substantially limits what they can do. And then the question is, are they entitled to the old zoning, or is the new zoning going to apply to them? Okay, so that's the issue of vested rights. And basically, it depends on the jurisdiction. So there are early vesting jurisdictions, for which Utah is an example. That's the Logan case. That I apologize that it did not pop up when it was supposed to, and so I just reloaded all that stuff on there. And so if you didn't get a chance to look at it, it's there. But the bottom line on early vesting states is that rights to the existing zoning vest with the landowner when the landowner has submitted a completed application to the local government for their development project. So if the zoning allows Project X, the landowner has filed an application with the local government for Project X, and then the local government changes the zoning, which will no longer allow Project X, the landowner can proceed as if Project X, as if the zoning that allowed for Project X still applies, because they have a vested right to that zoning. So that's the gist. That's the idea behind it. Okay? And there are a couple limitations on this, which I'm going to get to. But it's basically a completed application for the development project vests that. Now, completed. Okay, so one limitation is you can't just fill out the bare bones. You got your name, your address. I want to build huge mega project X and sign it and turn it in, and there's no details, there's no plans, you haven't paid any fees, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that doesn't count. Okay, it's got to be whatever counts as a completed application in that jurisdiction. That's going to depend on what the regulations say and so forth. But that's the idea. So, second limitation is that the landowner or the developer, and these, by the way, the rights attached to the landowner Sometimes the landowner is the developer, sometimes the landowner is in a contract with the developer, but basically what happens is the application is, if they're two different entities, it's the landowner and the developer that are applying together, okay? But the rights attached to the land, that's part of what we're doing here. But so I'm gonna keep referring to landowner, but oftentimes that means landowner slash developer, okay? So landowner slash developer. All right, so the idea here is that the landowner has to proceed with diligence towards completion of the project. Okay, so they can't file an application in 1975 and lock in 1975 zoning, and then in 2015 say, oh, now I want to develop this massive project that was okay in 1975, but now, of course, is not okay in 2015 because we've had so much growth and development that the zoning regulations are more restrictive now, okay? Because, waiting 40 years is not okay in early vesting jurisdictions. So the Logan case, the Utah Supreme Court makes clear that you have to proceed with reasonable diligence towards actually completing the project. Third limitation is that if the government has some compelling reason to limit the development project because of adverse impacts on public health and safety, they can change the zoning on you, right? You do not get vested rights to cause harm to the public health and safety, right? Okay, so now public health and safety, right? I distinguished that earlier from morals and general welfare, the other part of the police power. We generally, the courts generally take the view that they are not going to authorize, the landowners or developers to kill people or hurt people or maim them or that kind of stuff, right? I mean, the general idea is the government is at its greatest power when it is protecting the public health and safety. So that's a exception or a limitation on early vested rights. Okay, so if your Project X, it turns out, was allowed under the old zoning, and they changed the zoning because they now discovered that Project X is going to cause, serious risk of traffic fatalities or something like that, well, too bad. The zoning has changed on you. You got to comply with the new zoning. Okay, but that's a limited exception. And don't get carried away with this. Very indirect effects, like it's going to produce more runoff, which is going to contribute to more pollution, which might end up contributing in the aggregate with a bunch of other development to downstream algae blooms, which might lead to toxic algae and so forth in particular summer months, 6 years from now. Okay, that's not really exactly what they have in mind when they say it's limited by public health and safety. So you've got to be a little bit more direct than that. But that's the gist. Okay? Contrast that with late vesting states. So California has the classic late vesting case called Avco. And the Avco case was brought by a development company that was owned by a family, one of whose members in that family was one of my land development students early in my teaching career. So this was in Costa Mesa, California. Where this project came up. But it was sort of this massive development that was proposed, a lot of it primarily residential, condos and apartments and that kind of thing. And the city of Costa Mesa changed the zoning on them relatively late in the game. Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about before, but the Avco case illustrates is many development projects that are fairly substantial may require several different permits or approvals. So in this particular case, there was the need for a subdivision map. Then there was a need for a conditional use permit for certain aspects of the project. Then there was a need for variances. Then there was need for a site plan approval, and then eventually a building permit. And finally, somewhere down the road is what's called an occupancy permit. That is a purely ministerial act that basically is, is everything safe and ready to go. It's more, building, health and safety kind of inspection, building and fire and so forth, But anyway, and so a series of what we call discretionary permits, where there are standards, but evidence is going to be considered about whether the proposed project meets the criteria or the standards for each of those permits, okay? And so what had happened is they'd gotten the subdivision map approval, and I think maybe they'd gotten the conditional use permit. I don't know, maybe they'd gotten I think they maybe had gotten the variances. They had not gotten the building permit yet. And so the city changed the zoning to decrease the maximum permissible density. So basically, they couldn't build as many apartment units and as many condos and so forth. And so, of course, they sued and said they had vested rights to the existing zoning and so forth. And so the California Supreme Court said, no, we are a late vesting state. Okay, so a landowner does not get vested rights to the existing zoning until they have been granted, legitimately granted, the last discretionary permit, which in California is the building permit. So you have to have already been granted the building permit before the zoning locks in. Okay, that's really late in the game. And they said, not only that, but you have to have the last discretionary permit, which is the building permit, and you have to have incurred substantial expenditures, performed substantial work, and relied in good faith, detrimental reliance, so you detrimentally relied in good faith on the government's actions. Okay, so last discretionary permit, substantial expenditures, substantial work, and good faith detrimental reliance. Okay, right, 4 things, right, everybody follow? Okay, so really difficult to get vested rights in California. And by the way, if you have reason to believe that the government might change the zoning on you, that's not good faith detrimental reliance. You knew that the government was likely to change the zoning, decrease the density. Okay, so very difficult to get vested rights in a late vesting state. So it's a range, and it's actually, even though we refer to early vesting jurisdictions or late vesting jurisdictions, it's actually a continuum. States can kind of fall somewhere in between those two and so forth. Okay, so that's the gist. Now, having said that, there are in California some ways that you can, a landowner or developer can get vested rights. One is, okay, so the state legislature, well, of course, the development community was up in arms after AVCO, right? They're, oh my gosh, this means that we're incurring lots of financial risk, we're incurring lots of financial cost, and the rules are changing on us. This is terrible, and nobody's going to lend to us if this is all uncertain, and this is going to be the end of land development as we know it, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so, of course, there's a certain amount of power that the land development industry has, lobbying power, interest group power. But in addition, right, local governments, we're a little concerned about, okay, exactly how is this going to play out? If this creates too much uncertainty, it creates a lot of instability in being able to kind of project how development is going to occur in those communities. And so there was a compromise agreement reached in which the legislature enacted some statutes that allowed landowners to obtain vested rights when the government approved A, a vesting tentative tract map, or B, a development agreement that's provided in it that the landowner would have vested rights to that particular project. Okay? So what do those mean? Well, a vesting tentative tract map is actually a subdivision map. In California, how it works is they call it a tract map as opposed to a subdivision map. But that's the same thing, and I'm just going to kind of use our common terminology. But they approve this initially, but they call it tentative tract map because they don't actually file the final tract map until the development's already completed, and they make sure that everything actually shows up the way that it does. I mean, so like what happens if there needs to be a minor, 6-inch adjustment to the lot line in parcel 23 or whatever, right? They don't want to have to go back and take the official map out of the records and put the new one in and so forth. So all subdivision maps in California are technically tentative until the project's totally completed, and then what's filed in the records is the final tract map. But for all practical purposes, the tentative tract map is the subdivision map that gets approved, right? And so the landowner can obtain vested rights to whatever zoning applies to their property at the time their tentative tract map is approved. The tentative one, not the final one, the tentative one, by simply putting in big bold letters at the top the word vesting. Okay? So it's just as simple as that. You put in clear, big bold letters, vesting. Why big bold letters? So that the local officials know that that's what they're approving, that they're going to approve a vested tentative tract map. Or you can use vested. You can say vesting or vested either way, but that you put it in big bold letters at the top, and then if it gets approved, now all of a sudden you have vested rights. Well, the practical reality is that the applications for vesting tentative tract maps are scrutinized much more carefully because the government is giving up its right to change the zoning on the landowner. And so very often the landowner or the developer has to give the city more in the way of conditions, exactions, fees, etc., in order to get that through. But it then locks in the zoning for them and guarantees that they can continue with the project. The other option is for the city and the landowner / developer to enter into a development agreement, in which they define specifically what the development will be and include in the agreement that the landowner has vested rights to the zoning at that time. And then basically, furthermore, it's vested rights to the terms of the development agreement. And so it basically is, in essence, a type of zoning that is negotiated, right? So it's whatever the project is, however the project's described in the development agreement, and there's going to be, plans and designs and renderings and so forth attached as attachments. But whatever that is, that's what the parties have agreed to. Again, in order to get this through, very often the developer is agreeing to more than they're legally required to. more schools, more parks, more contributions to the Affordable Housing Fund, whatever, okay? And so, but what they're getting in exchange is vested rights, which the city does not have to give them, right? The city doesn't have to do it, and the city doesn't have to enter into the development agreement. So it's basically an exchange, right? I mean, a negotiated exchange. And those cities and developers love these things. I mean, they love these things because it allows them to sit down and negotiate and get around the sort of both the city's ability to change the zoning law, but also the limits on the city's ability to ask for various kinds of exactions and so forth. Okay? So that's how vested rights work. Questions? Okay. Vested rights are different than the non-conforming use doctrine, because the non-conforming use doctrine is about what happens when there is already an existing use that's being made of the property, and now the local government changes the zoning so that use is no longer legitimate, no longer allowed. Okay, so the first one is where there's a proposed use, vested rights. Okay, the second one, non-conforming use doctrine, is about an existing use. Okay, so you are currently on the current zoning code in a particular town. You're operating a bookstore in an old house, and that zoning code allows it. And the city says, hey, we got to kind of, our town's growing. We got to beef up our zoning code, and we're no longer going to allow retail uses in houses. Okay, right? So there's to try to get a little bit more, beef up their zoning code. They'll get a little bit more regulatory. But you're already using the house for a bookstore. Your use is what's called a non-conforming use. You are entitled, you have a property right to continue to use your property as it was legally allowed before they changed the zoning code, with some exceptions, okay? With some exceptions. And by the way, sometimes some of this appears on the bar exam or the or the AICP exam. Okay, so what are we looking for? What are the exceptions? Okay, one is that if the property is destroyed or severely damaged, damaged extensively enough, you are not allowed to rebuild it with the old use. You have to now switch to you now have to comply with the existing zoning if the property is destroyed or so extensively damaged that you basically would have to rebuild. Okay, so that's one rule. Having said that, there are definitely local governments that allow you to put the old use back. Okay, so just because they're not required to doesn't mean that they don't do it. Okay, so the local government is certainly free to allow you to restore or reestablish your non-conforming use, but under the non-conforming use doctrine, they are not required to. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, the difference between what the doctrine requires versus what local governments sometimes choose to do. Secondly, you cannot alter the use. You can't change it, right? You can't go now from the bookstore to the coffee house, right? So, I mean, I know, that's very sad. Can't do it at the coffee house, but that's the gist, right? So that's a different use. And so you can't alter the use, and you can't enlarge the use. Okay, so now you can't say, hey, now I'm going to build on 6 new rooms in the back of the house that are now going to house my increasingly large inventory of books. Right? Does that make sense? Okay, so enlarge or alter the use. Not allowed. The third thing is that the government is entitled to force you to eliminate your use over time with what's called a reasonable amortization period. Reasonable amortization period. And this is mentioned in the Gage case. Okay, so the idea here is that once you as a landowner, as a property owner, have had the opportunity to get a return, a reasonable return on your investment, they can force you to phase out your use, your non-conforming use, Now, right? We're all in the mindset that this is now no longer allowed under the zoning code, and the only reason you're allowed to continue this use is because it's non-conforming. And the idea is that they are entitled to force you to phase it out. Sometimes a government will choose to do so when a particular non-conforming use is particularly problematic, is causing problems, and they're sort of saying, okay, well, we've got to get a handle on this. We got to rein this in. So, let's assume for a moment that now, bookstores are super popular, and there's all sorts of cars all the time, and you're hosting, these book signing parties for books written by wild and crazy celebrities who are, got lots of, wild parties and loud music and so on and so forth. And the town says, hey, we gotta get a handle on this. We got, this is too much. And so we're going to use our power to force you to phase out after some sort of amortization period. Okay? Well, that's possible. But in my experience, once a use is a non-conforming use, unless you're changing it or it's destroyed, very rarely does the government actually take any action to force you to change the use. Okay? I mean, that's just, in reality, it's just politically unpopular to do that. It's uncomfortable for the local officials to affirmatively try to force you to change your existing use, even though it is now non-conforming. So that's just my practical real-world experience with it. But I'm sure that we could, if we did enough digging, we could find examples where non-conforming use owners are being forced out. Okay? Questions about that? Okay. Another set of tools. So these are basically changes in the zoning, and it might have to do with use, it might have to do with density. I guess it's possible it could have to do with bulk or height or some other kinds of things, parking, etc. Okay, but we're mostly talking about changes in zoning. Now what we're going to talk about is a series of specific kinds of growth controls that local governments sometimes adopt, to try to rein in or manage or control rapid growth, rapid development patterns. And let's think for just a moment about what kind of impacts rapid growth have on localities that cause them to be concerned and want to manage or control. What are some of the impacts? Traffic, okay, big one, traffic. And let's talk a little bit more about traffic. What about it? What's that?
More people in the area, more cars.
More cars?
It impacts the roads and how often they need to be redone.
Right, okay. So it's more traffic, but then also the capacity of the existing road system, right? And just think about the ways in which we expand the capacity of roads, right? We do it all the time, right? Everybody's right. There's this whole discussion about putting a outer loop, right, on the right. It's just good, right, and that's apparently that path is, or that approach has been changed with the new governor, right? Did everybody see that? No, nobody knows what I'm talking about? So there's going to be something, and there was concern it was going to go through Bernheim, and it was going to go through farms in Shelby County, and so there were some local concerns and some environmental concerns. And so I think what they're going to do is, instead of building an entire new route, they're going to try to expand existing roads to try to handle the out traffic is kind of the gist of it. Okay, but it happens, right? I mean, the the Ohio River Bridges projects, right? All about, our traffic capacity, having to do partly with development and growth, partly also having to do with interstate transportation as well. But anyway, but you get the idea. It happens all the time, but it's costly. It takes time. And so very often you can have a situation where the pace of development far exceeds the capacity of the transportation system to keep up with it. Okay? And then you can think about, well, maybe we should do alternatives, right? There's going to be somebody who's going to say, well, we should be doing more rail and rapid transit and other kinds of more infill development with more pedestrian oriented or bicycling or whatever, right? Okay. Fine, all good, right? All interesting ideas and so forth. But again, the amount of time and the amount of resources it takes to make that happen is often much slower, and the resources don't come as fully and as quickly as the development itself, the growth itself. Okay, so that's one of the challenges. What else in terms of growth? Displacement, okay? So displacement of existing residents as new areas get sort of redeveloped, gentrified. All right, okay, good. What else?
Like the impact on the sewer systems and everything.
Sewer systems, okay? Sewer systems, water supplies, okay? Not very often do you really see much on electric or gas systems. I mean, so for whatever for whatever reason, many electric and gas utilities seem to be able to handle growth. Although, right now, as some of you may have noticed in the news, there tends to be some issues related to how rapidly that developed without really taking into account the potential for causing wildfires. And so now what we've got is the electrical systems being taken down. They take it offline during periods of, where it's really dry with high winds in order to try to prevent these massive wildfires, which of course then means people are without electricity, and it's a big problem. But that probably has more to do with it wasn't well conceived, wasn't well planned. But sewer and water are big ones, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about water in a bit, but what else? What other sort of infrastructure doesn't always keep up very well with development?
Housing.
Housing, okay? So if you have a lot of growth and development, some of that's going to be housing development, but it may be particular kind, okay? So what kind of housing do developers like to develop?
High-rise apartments?
No.
Single family?
Okay, they love the cookie-cutter, single-family residential subdivision, right? Because, why? It's easy to have a guaranteed return on that, right? Look at all of Oldham County, Bullitt County, right? I mean, the places are, as at the kind of outer fringe of Louisville, right? Just go drive across the Lewis and Clark Bridge, the East End Bridge, and see all the development that's happening over there, right? Okay, so easy to develop, to take, an undeveloped piece of land, farmland or whatever, and turn it into a bunch of residential homes that you can, you've got some price point, $350,000 to $500,000 or whatever it happens to be, and you can sell them and you can make money, right? Yep, okay. So what doesn't keep up? It's affordable housing, right? Right? It's housing aimed at low and moderate income. Well, why do you need that? Why don't we just have a bunch of sort of fancy schmancy suburban development and say, hey, that's how we want to grow.
People.
Gotta have your audience.
Okay.
You may not be able to afford it.
Okay, may not be able to afford it, but let's say, hey, that's who we want to attract, right? We want to attract all these bright lawyers and planners who are coming out of U of L with zero educational debt and going to buy their $500,000 home, right? Okay, I got your attention. At least some of you are now awake. But you get the idea, right? I mean, it's that maybe they want to have all the professionals who can afford that. Why is that not going to work?
You still need services for those people.
Yes, okay. So who's working at Kroger's, at Lowe's, at the service station, right? Do you see what, right? I mean, the reality is when you have growth and development, okay, that comes with a whole variety of economic activities that include more modest wage and to be, let's be honest, with some of us pretty low wage work, right? And workers and who are not buying $500,000 homes in the new subdivision, right? Does everybody see that? Now, having said that, we do see some examples of where it's the person working at the service station is the 24-year-old college graduate who's living at home with the parents in the $500,000 home, right? But that's a limited, right? To just be honest with you, that's going to be right. And people get kind of caught up in that story and say, oh, well, that's who it is. Well, it's not just who it is, right? And so the reality is that it's what they call jobs housing balance. Okay, you've got to have a range of housing for a range of jobs. There is a professor who sort of, I think he sort of characterizes himself as an urbanist. He's a scholar, and he wrote, his name's Richard Florida. Anybody familiar with Richard Florida's writing? So he wrote a number of important books and works on cities like Seattle and San Francisco and place that grow with what he calls the creative class. So these are all people who are, the high-tech people, the entertainment people, the inventors, and so on and so forth. All these sort of this creative class, and he's like, oh, isn't this? These are amazing, and look, everybody wants to live in these cities, and people, are. They go work at their high-tech firm, and they, these cities are growing, and they're thriving, and they go, windsurfing on the weekends, and climbing mountains, and going to cool, funky, organic, local coffee shops, and so on and so forth, right? And it's like, this is this amazing urban development. Well, he got criticized some, and now he is, I don't know if repentantly, but at least he switched gears and is now saying, okay, wait, I wrote all about this, but there's a problem, and it's inequality. It's that these places have totally outpriced the whole rest of the population, which is needed to actually have a good, thriving regional economy, right? And so that's an issue as well. Another big one that nobody's talked about yet, schools. Schools. You have all this growth of population, of subdivisions. You need schools for folks, right? And they take time to build. They don't just spring up overnight. They take time to staff, etc. Okay? And we could go on. Parks is another one, something to think about, so forth. Okay. So how do governments, local governments, control growth? Well, one example is what we call concurrency requirements. Concurrency requirements, which basically say development is only allowed when there are sufficient public facilities and infrastructure to support them. Okay, sufficient public facilities and infrastructure to support them. So the classic case, all the way back in 1972, is the Golden case. and out of New York, and this in the town adopted what was called what was a point system. Basically, new residential development required what they called special permits, and you could qualify, your development could qualify for a special permit based on accumulating enough points. And the point system were based on sewers, available sewers. Secondly, drainage facilities. Third, improved public parks or recreational facilities, and they allowed schools to count. Okay, so this is one of the early examples of sort of the use of schools for parks and recreational space. Fourth, roads. And fifth, firehouses. And you had to get 15 points in order to get a permit under the system. And you could get, there were variances that were allowed under certain circumstances. So even if you couldn't get all 15 points, under certain circumstances, you might get a variance from the permit system. Okay? So that's how it worked. So the courts love this, and the planning profession love this. Okay? It's very infrastructure based. It's got sort of a scientific kind of basis, and it has three features that the court particularly points out. First of all, the requirements, the concurrency requirements, had a nexus to the actual impacts of of new growth and new development on land use and on the local infrastructure needed to support land use. So the court specifically talks about nexus, and they specifically say that the government local government cannot use its zoning and land use regulatory powers for general police power purposes. Okay, so just let's assume for a moment that they just wanted more firehouses, right? Because hey, we want to grow our fire department. Okay, that is not a legitimate basis for using land use regulatory powers. There has to be a nexus to the impact of these developments to the need for firehouses, the adequacy of the firehouse infrastructure to support that development. Does everybody see, right? That goes back to that land use nexus we talked about. So this is a case that is making a big deal about the land use nexus. Now they said it totally meets it, right? I mean, so it's not a big problem, but it's just one of the elements of that. Secondly, the concurrency requirements, the point system, was adopted in conjunction with an 18-year capital improvement plan that was incorporated into the local comprehensive plan. Okay, so what do we know about that? We know from Euclid all the way back in the 20s, when the court sees evidence of rational comprehensive planning, they love it. They're like, okay, the city's not, or town's not just doing this willy-nilly, there's a plan, and the court likes that, okay? So the use of planning. And then, of course, the point system itself, it's all very, scientific or quasi-scientific, right? It's based on objective evidence about what the development project, what kind of impacts it's going to have, and what kind of infrastructure exists. Okay? So this is famous. I can't really tell you for sure how often it comes up on the AICP exam, but my sense is it comes up a lot because in park planners love it, and it's the intersection of planning and law. So those of you who are going to take it, just be aware. A somewhat different approach was Associated Home Builders of the Greater East Bay versus the City of Livermore, okay, which is 1976. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that there was a lot of suburban growth and development in the 50s and 60s, but by the 70s, it was becoming something of a crisis for how local governments were equipped to provide the infrastructure to support this kind of development. So Livermore's in the San Francisco Bay Area, and what they did, what the city of Livermore did, is they put a moratorium on new residential development. We're going to talk about moratoria over here, so we're going to get to more of that. But this actually falls under the concurrency requirement because the moratorium on new residential development was based on the availability of 3 specific types of infrastructure. Educational facilities, okay, number 1, educational facilities. Number 2, sewage treatment facilities. And number 3, water supplies. Okay? So educational facilities, sewage treatment facilities, and water supplies. And they basically said, when the city of Livermore has enough of each of these, we will allow more residential development. Okay? So again, there was a plan, and they had a plan, a specific plan to develop more of each of these. But the home builders did not like it, and they sued. And one of the things they said is, because there's a moratorium on new residential development, this is preventing new people from moving into the city of Livermore, and therefore interferes with their constitutional right to travel. Okay? Now, I actually keep suggesting to the dean that he needs to fund my trips because I have a constitutional right to travel, but he doesn't sort of see it that way. But anyway, all right, so what does this mean? Okay, the constitutional right to travel is basically the idea that, like people from Indiana can't say, all those people from Kentucky, we don't like them, we're going to keep them out, right? Where we have a national system here, and so you are able to move from state to state and so forth. You don't need a passport to go to another state, et cetera, okay? And the court was like, nah. Nice try, but no. Why? Because when existing homeowners in Livermore sell their houses, we decide to move elsewhere, or, some of them will, cease living, and their kids will, heirs or whatever, will sell off the home. New people from somewhere else can buy it and move in. It's not really, the city of Livermore hasn't said, and we now hereby prohibit, anybody from Kentucky to move to Livermore, California, right? That's not what the rule is. So no effect on the right to travel. But lo and behold, then they go to the basic substantive due process standard. And what's our substantive due process standard? Is it fairly debatable that the regulation is rationally related to a legitimate government purpose, right? The rational basis test and the fairly debatable standard. Well, they add more to it. And so this is what is called rational basis test with bite. My constitutional law professor, Gerald Gunther, is the one who coined this term in a famous law review article, rational basis test with bite. What does it mean? Well, in this particular case, the California Supreme Court applies what they call the regional welfare test. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you can get rational basis test with bite. But in this particular case, what they said is, okay, local governments have a legitimate basis for regulating growth and development, but they cannot just stop all new development and push the demand for existing development onto other cities in the area, right? So think about this is the city of Livermore in the San Francisco Bay Area. There's all kinds of other localities, Oakland and, so on and so forth. All sorts of other localities in the Bay Area. And if there's no new housing development in Livermore, at some point that is going to mean that there's more housing and overcrowding and so forth in other communities. And it's going to harm their infrastructure and overburden their infrastructure. So what they say is that they're going to look at, first of all, the probable effect and duration of the growth control. Secondly, they're going to look to see if the local government has identified and weighed competing interests that are affected by the growth control. And then third, they're going to ask, is the growth control, in light of its probable impact, a reasonable accommodation of competing interests? Reasonable accommodation of competing interests. So bottom line, okay, so that's the three elements. But really the bottom line is they're really saying, does the growth control make a reasonable accommodation among competing impacts? Okay, so the impacts on managing growth versus the impacts on pushing growth into other cities in the region. Okay, and so in this particular case, they upheld it. They said, it's very reasonable. They have a plan to increase the schools, the sewer systems, and the water supply, so this is okay. But my point here is, because of the impact of growth controls on other localities, now the California Supreme Court, is applying some higher standard of review than we saw in other cases like Euclid. Does everybody see that? Okay, so that's what's going on there in the city of Livermore. So these are a couple of key concurrency, they're cases in which local concurrency ordinances, regulations were applied. More recently, state legislatures got into the business of requiring concurrency. Okay, so there are more generally what are called concurrency laws, sometimes called assured supply laws. I coined the term wet growth to talk about the requirements that land development and growth be tied to available water. Okay, and the water impacts of growth and development. So this was started with a conference I held ages ago out in Southern California, and led to a book and some articles and so on and so forth, and has kind of taken off in the literature and so forth. But the idea here is that we've started seeing sometimes local governments, but usually state governments, forcing local governments to limit development unless there's actually available infrastructure. And in the case of wet growth, it's particularly water infrastructure. So this is a big problem in the West. Although, having said that, there was a community, and I cannot remember the name of it, but there was a community, a city, or a township, I think it was really a township, in New York State that grew so much it ran out of water. Okay, they literally ran out of water. They did not have enough water for the amount of development. The city of Atlanta, I don't know if any of y'all remember this, but the city of Atlanta came within 90 days of running out of water, okay, from Lake Lanier. Okay, Lake Lanier is, even though it's a lake, yes, but it's really a reservoir operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with water from the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River System, it's ACF, Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River System, which has become, overcommitted. Okay, so it's supposed to support Atlanta, which grew without any consideration for available water supply. Okay, anybody been? Well, I know you. Yes, Taylor's been to Atlanta, right? Okay, so none others of you have been. What's Atlanta like? Nightmare. Okay. Okay. Big sprawl. Right. There was not much planning. Right. It's just grew and grew and grew. Right. Yes. okay? And that included not much planning for where the water is going to come from, okay? There's quite a bit of agriculture in Georgia that relies on the ACF system, okay? Lake Lanier has all kind of development around it that is very water oriented. So nobody wants a lake house on Lake Lanier if there's not enough water for your boating and whatever, water skiing and that kind of stuff, right? The water in the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint River provides water to Alabama and Florida, who ended up suing Georgia because they weren't getting enough, including the #1 oyster fishery in the United States. I actually think it might actually even be in the world, but certainly in the United States. It's the Apalachicola Bay, which is in the sort of basically in the armpit of the Panhandle, right? Where the Panhandle, right about where it's going to turn and go south of Florida, right? Everybody know what I'm talking about? So south of Tallahassee, okay? And Tallahassee is actually really the armpit of Florida because it's. Have anybody ever been there? Am I offending anybody? Okay, I mean, so I went. I did a visit. I spent a week at Florida State. It was very nice. They treated me very nicely. But Tallahassee's a truly abysmal city. Okay, another example of bad planning. Okay, but anyway, but the oyster fisheries, right? Okay, and I mean, some of you may like to go to restaurants and enjoy oysters and so forth. But the problem is, if there's not enough fresh water coming out of the Apalachicola River into the oyster beds there in the Apalachicola Bay, we don't get oysters. That's just the bottom line. So anyway, endangered species, mussels in the river system, etc. Okay, so it's a big problem. And so there was a drought. During the drought, there were places where the water mains or the fire hydrants in Atlanta broke, and the water flowed into the street for days without being fixed. Okay, so again, and new development kept being approved, even though nobody knew where the water was going. Okay, so this is what was going on. Okay, so part of why I bring all this up is this is the mismatch between development and available water supplies. Okay? And it was a big issue. Eventually, the drought broke, and so that's part of what happened. Is eventually, Mother Nature saved Atlanta. But it was a problem, and part of what I want to mention is this is in the eastern part of the United States where we normally have plenty of water. Right? Does everybody see that? I just want to, it's a big problem in the West. Okay. I mentioned Las Vegas in the first or second class session. Okay, Las Vegas gets 3 to 5 inches of rainfall a year. They have a severe mismatch between urban development and their water supply. Many of you probably followed the plight of California when they went through a very severe drought. And again, more demand for water than supply. However, fortunately, before the drought in California, the California legislature had enacted SB 221, which is a concurrency / assured supply / wet growth law. And it basically prohibits certain kinds of major development unless there are actual water supplies available, okay? And by actual supplies, we use the term, it's not in the law itself, but this is what we, people who are in the know call it wet water. And you're like, Professor Arnold, water's wet, what do we mean? Okay, and the term wet water is a contrast to what we call paper rights. So you can have a legal right on paper in some sort of document that says you are entitled to X amount of water. But if your priority in the prior appropriation system of water in that state is like really low, like like you got your rights recently, and you're really, you're not first priority or second or whatever. You're really late, right? And there's not enough water to supply everybody who has water rights. Your paper rights are really meaningless. They're worthless, right? Because there's never going to be enough water to meet what you technically have a right to, right? Because the supply doesn't match the actual number of rights that are out there, the amount of rights. And so what happened is the California legislature stepped in and said, look, we're tired of developments being approved on the basis of the developer, applying for a permit from some water source like the Colorado River or whatever that is already over appropriated, and there's no actual water ever going to come from it to this development project. It's just not ever going to happen. It's just not enough water. Okay, and so they said you have to have actual supplies. So in other words, what we call wet water. Okay, so those are concurrency requirements. Next are tempo controls. Okay, so tempo controls are about, they're kind of really quotas. A certain amount of development per amount of time, per period of time. So number of residential approvals or number of building permit approvals over a period of time. So the classic case is Construction Industry Association versus the City of Petaluma, which is a 1975 case. So again, you're seeing a pattern here. And this was, they adopted what was called the Petaluma Plan. Always nice to name your plan something that might live on and either famously or infamously, but it was basically a growth control rate. And it said a maximum number of 500 new residential dwelling units per year. In addition, they, in the Petaluma plan, they identified a green belt where they were going to protect or create a sort of greenway around the city and so forth. And so they said, we're going to, it's first come, first serve. After we, so if on, June 17th, we have granted building permit number 500, there will be no new building permits for the entire year. January 1st, we'll start all over again. Okay, first come, first serve. Huh? And of course, people apply in, in June, or maybe they've even applied earlier, and then, they haven't gotten approved yet, and now we've reached the 500, then they're just in the queue for January 1st the next year. So you can imagine if by August 12th, there are now 1,200 residential units that have been applied for. What's going to happen is on January 1st, there are going to be another 500 approved, and we already have 200 more now in the pipeline, right? And for the following year, right? You see how that goes, all right? So that's how that works. And so again, the construction industry sued, and they said this is exclusionary, this is excluding newcomers, and so forth. And what happens is the court says, oh no, this is a legitimate planning tool, a legitimate growth control tool, and it meets the rational basis test because the public welfare includes preserving the city's small town character. It includes protection of open spaces. It includes, so regional, public welfare includes low density of population, low density development, and includes growth at an orderly and deliberate rate. Okay, so basically what they say is, so it doesn't have to be high density. It doesn't have to be, we can actually limit growth and development, and that's exclusionary, and and so you can have this sort of again in the Bay Area, this sort of protection of this little sort of quaint small town environment. Okay, so what are the effects that the Petaluma plan is going to have? I've already talked a little bit about this, but what is the real effect of this kind of tempo control?
I imagine housing would get pretty expensive.
Yep. Okay, I mean, it's a supply and demand issue, right? Okay, so if the supply is limited, okay, then what that means is the price is going to go up, right? That's just how it works. Okay, what else? What happened in Anaheim? Remember we talked about this? Right, didn't we talk about this? There's
Large numbers of people living in one dwelling.
Yes.
Intended for a single family.
Exactly. So another thing that's going to happen is overcrowding, right? People have to go somewhere, and what we find is land use controls are really not especially effective at stopping or changing demographic patterns. Okay, so if this is a popular area and it's a growing area, at some point, what's going to happen is you're going to get overcrowding. What else is going to happen? Well, yeah.
I would imagine there'd be a lot of development immediately outside of Petaluma's border.
Exactly. So, I mean, again, the growth is going to go somewhere. There's a demand for it. The growth is going to go somewhere. So all around Petaluma, you're going to have massive growth pressures. And so if all those communities do not have a Petaluma plan, right, now all of a sudden they're going to be the places where there's sort of massive, perhaps uncontrolled growth that has all kinds of negative impacts. Okay, so I mean, and that's I mean that's how it's going to play out. Okay, so but nonetheless, this is. Part of the thing about Petaluma is this is one of a number of cases in which the courts, at least at one time, basically said, in essence, that the vision of suburban sprawl is a legitimate government goal. Okay, right? I mean, legally, a legitimate government goal to have the low density, small town, village, suburban development, right? With big open space, lots of low density development, and in the end, of course, what it means is also high cost. The prices of housing are fairly high. Okay. Next type of growth control is moratorium. Okay, a moratorium is a prohibition on all new development for a temporary period until the government can develop a set of regulations that are well studied and carefully tailored to to manage the need. So basically the idea is there's all of a sudden this sort of massive or rapid growth and development. The city officials, for all practical purposes, freak out. Okay, so that's not exactly legal analysis, but that's in essence what's going on. They're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? They do not. They want to stop the development before it gets carried away and has too much impact. But it's going to take some time to figure out where growth and development should occur, under what circumstances they're going to need. They're going to need to develop the regulations, and so they just impose a moratorium on all new development. And it might be in a particular area. It might not be, might not be citywide. It might be, in just a particular area or a particular type of development. Okay, so, let's assume there was a time period when there were these cyber cafes. Anybody ever go to a cyber cafe? So there were these places that had, computer terminals, and young people would go and they'd get their coffee or their Red Bull or their whatever and play video games. In California, they were places that became they attracted members of gangs who would be playing members of rival gangs who were at a different cyber cafe, and they would ping the IP addresses, and then one gang would show up and shoot the other gang members in the parking lot of the cyber cafe. Okay, this is actually really, it's a lot of, it's not just, that's not just sort of, let's be anxious about crime. There's actually a lot of incidents of this actually going on. Okay, it was but what was happening is there in the zoning codes at the time, there was no clear definition of what a cyber cafe was and what use it fit under. So they were just kind of popping up here and there and everywhere. All sorts of places. So, actually there was one right next to one of the places that was near and dear to my heart, the In-N-Out Burger. But I kind of didn't want to get shot by the competing gangs while doing the In-N-Out Burger drive-thru, right? So actually, I didn't get shot. But anyway, but the problem was that, but it wasn't just Anaheim. It was all over Southern California. And maybe Northern California too. I don't know. It was a problem, but nobody had ever anticipated this, and so localities were struggling what to do. Well, what many of them did was just impose a moratorium on new cyber cafes for some period of time. I think it was 18 months or something like that, until regulations could be adopted that figured out where we're going. Nobody was going to prohibit them altogether because, at the time, this was still a time period when people, it wasn't like you went to there wasn't a lot of like Starbucks with Wi-Fi and stuff. People went and used these computer terminals if they didn't have their own computer or whatever. So it was, there was a need for them. But the question is, where and under what circumstances? The other thing was, of course, that was going on is they all had the tinted windows that sort of made it easier for crime to happen in them going undetected, right? Because the law enforcement couldn't see what was going on in the cyber cafes. And of course, obviously, part of the idea is you don't want the sun shining on your computer screens, but in other words, there had to be some development standards that were created so that you could have reasonable cyber cafes and under certain circumstances in certain places. So that was an example of a moratorium. The classic case is Tahoe Sierra Preservation Council versus Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, U.S. Supreme Court case, where the U.S. Supreme Court says that the government has not taken the private property of a landowner when it enacts a temporary moratorium, even though that landowner cannot make any use of their property during the moratorium. Okay, so not a temporary moratorium is not a taking. We're going to deal with takings later, but in the semester. But the basic bottom line in this particular case is the Supreme Court basically approves of the use of temporary moratorium, but there are two conditions. One is they need to be temporary, and the court specifically says after about 18 to 24 months, the local government is now in the danger zone of the moratorium being a taking. Okay, so they pretty much sort of say temporary. They don't limit it to 18 to 24 months, but they send a signal that, okay, you got to really have a good plan if it's anything more than 18 to 24 months. Okay? Secondly, is it has to legitimately be for the purpose of developing regulations that will manage the growth after the moratorium is lifted. In other words, you can't just use the moratorium as a pretext for stopping development in the long run. You have to use it as a tool for planning and development of the regulation. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? So those are the two limitations. And if it's not, then it may be a taking, which means the government has to compensate the owner that can't use their land. But during the time period of the temporary, legitimate moratorium, there is no taking and no compensation required. This is actually basically about a development moratorium on all new development around Lake Tahoe. Anybody been to Lake Tahoe? What? Get out. Go see the world. Yes. Okay, so then we're back to we need the travel fund from the dean, right? Okay, right to travel. Let's go to Lake Tahoe. But anyway, wonderful skiing. Okay. I've been more in the summer where it's amazing aquatic sports, and the lake is unusually clear. Okay, it's a wonderful crystal clear lake, except it's been what's the word I'm looking for? It's become less and less clear. It's getting all this sort of runoff from development, and the clarity of the lake is decreasing, it's pretty distinctive for its clarity, and it's beautiful and all that kind of stuff. And so what's basically happening is a natural resource is declining in value and function because of uncontrolled development. So all the way back, and I think this was in the 70s, possibly it could have been the 60s, but I think it's the 1970s, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency was formed, okay, by California and Nevada with the approval of Congress, okay, because it's an interstate compact, and the Constitution prohibits interstate compacts unless they are approved by Congress. The theory behind that was the founders didn't want states ganging up on the federal government. Okay, so that's the theory. So any interstate compact has to be approved by Congress, or it's no good. Okay, but California and Nevada entered into this, creating a strongly regulatory agency, and the governors who developed this, pushed this, created this were Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, and Paul Laxalt, who was his buddy, conservative Republican governor of Nevada. Okay, so two conservative Republican governors creating this because, bottom line is, big resource, big economic resource for the state of California and the state of Nevada, because it's the Lake Tahoe straddles the state border, and once the clarity is gone, the value goes, right? Okay, so, but of course, by the 1990s, you had this real tension between this moratorium that was enacted in the 1990s by the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and the landowners who were saying, "Hey, now I can't develop my property." Okay? So that's the Tahoe case. Next mechanism, impact fees. Okay? So the St. Johns County is the case that illustrates impact fees. Impact fees basically require developers to pay for the impacts of their development. So school funds, park funds, road funds, affordable housing funds. It varies from state to state, locality to locality, what they are. But they're widely used in many states and localities. We are going to talk about the constitutional limitations on impact fees later when we talk about takings. So that's the takings clause, and so impact fees count as exactions, and so there's an exaction takings set of tests that we're going to look at. But impact fees are also defined, authorized, and limited, by state law as a growth control mechanism. And so part of what we want to see is that in some states, there are very strict requirements that impact fees be earmarked for infrastructure that directly serves the development. Okay? So if, for example, the developer is required to pay a certain number of dollars into the school fund, those dollars need to be somehow put into an account in those states that require earmarking for schools for that development and not other developments. Right? Does everybody see what I'm saying? Okay, now that is not the requirement in every state, but it is, so some states are much more loose or liberal about impact fees and allow the locality to collect them and just put them in a fund. Usually they have to be for that particular purpose. Like, so you can't use impact fees just for general local government revenues, right? So you can't take the school impact fees, and then build, I don't know, new city hall or the pay for people to be guests of the mayor at the Derby, for example. Okay, or whatever. Okay, some of you are following this, some of you are looking at me blankly. But anyway, that idea, right? I mean, so in other words, they're not general funds, but for the type of infrastructure that's needed. But the infrastructure can, in some states, can serve, a broader, so let's assume for a moment you have, a bunch of development happening in your residential subdivision A, residential subdivision B, residential subdivision C. In the states that do not require earmarking, you can put the school impact fee funds all together and build schools that serve that whole area of town. Whereas in the states that require earmarking, you have to show that those particular dollars that the developer for subdivision A has contributed are going for schools that serve subdivision A. Does everybody see that? Okay, all right.
What's the case here?
Kentucky is actually kind of more in between. Okay, so it actually turns out to be sort of a spectrum, really. And so the courts have reined in impact fees that are too indirect, right? But it's not as tight as the St. Johns County case, okay? So again, it's sort of a range of standards across the spectrum. Okay? And finally, urban growth boundaries, okay? And so talking about Kentucky, what you will learn in this class, which I guarantee you is probably not covered in most other land use classes, but that's because they're not getting as superior a land use education as you are here, we say with enormous state pride, is that the very first urban growth boundary was not Portland, like everybody wants to say, wrongly, inaccurately. It was actually Lexington, okay? And Lexington has an urban service boundary that was adopted in 1958. And the urban service boundary prohibits the extension of urban services like roads and sewers and other kind of infrastructure outside of the urban service boundary. So basically prohibits development supporting infrastructure and limits it to the areas within the urban service boundary. And the boundary was drawn on the basis of the quality of soils of the land in what are essentially bluegrass horse farms. Okay, so we're talking about horse breeding farms where the soil is rich in phosphorus and something else that I'm not remembering off the top of my head.
Like calcium in the limes?
Might be. I think it actually might be magnesium. But it's, I think it might be phosphorus and magnesium. But anyway, but phosphorus is the big one. But anyway, the main one. But it is, then of course uptakes into the grasses that the horses eat, and they grow into big, strong, thoroughbred horses that win the Kentucky Derby. Right? I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Okay, so the problem is, if we ever develop those lands, okay, they're the only ones in the U.S. like that. That goes away. It's like Lake Tahoe, right? I mean, once we destroy Lake Tahoe, there is no more, I mean, it's just a cloudy, murky lake, right? And once we destroy or build over these horse farms in the Lexington area, then, there's not anything more like that. Okay? Now, there are other places. Actually, there's a lot of horse training around Ocala, Florida. Okay? Right? Because actually the weather's pretty good for that to happen down there. But in general, far superior for them to be born, bred, raised here, and then trained down there. Okay? That's the sort of general idea. But, of course, there's all sorts of land development pressures. And so the urban service boundary has undergone some modest adjustments a couple of times since 1958. There have been times when proposed adjustments have been rejected by the local government or the voters. Okay? But again, on the basis of this is going to be the impact on the horse industry if this happens, if we allow development. But let's be honest, there's enormous growth pressures. And as I pointed out early on when we were talking about Lexington as an example of mixed good and bad planning, it is this urban service boundary actually does something really significant from a land use and environmental perspective. But let's be honest, the transportation planning in Lexington is horrible. Okay, right? People drive around Lexington, takes forever, right? It's really awful, right? Okay, so, and I don't know how much of that is inherent in this fact that, we're keeping the development contained, but I do think that probably what happened is that the idea was to keep the development to the urban service boundary, but then nobody really thought through, okay, if we have a lot more development within the urban service boundary, how's everybody gonna get around? Okay, because it's all based on kind of how people got around in 1958, which is really not very forward thinking about how they get around that. Of course, the most famous urban service boundary is Portland's urban growth boundary, which was adopted pursuant to a state statute, the Oregon Growth Management Act, which was enacted in 1973. Okay? So again, obviously, the early to mid-70s is a time period in which lots and lots of local governments are dealing with growth issues. A couple things about this. And you have a case that deals with a variance from their urban growth, Portland's urban growth boundary. There are a couple of things. First of all, there is, under the state law, there is an entity called LUBA, and LUBA is the Land Use Board of Appeals. And it was a mechanism set up to basically provide variances from the growth boundaries and growth controls. Okay? So that's from the Growth Management Act. Okay? So LUBA is basically kind of like a Board of Zoning Appeals, but it's for the Growth Management Act in Oregon. The other thing that's important to understand is, even though Portland gets a lot of attention for having an urban growth boundary, the reality is that it was drawn really far out. And there is a lot of sprawl-like development within Portland's urban growth boundary, okay? And in fact, the density of development in Los Angeles, which often gets blamed for sprawl, right? People say, so, Los Angeles all spread out and so on and so forth. The density of development in Los Angeles is many times higher than the density in Portland. Okay? I mean, part of the problem with Los Angeles is just so many people, right? But the reality is, when you actually get down to it, Los Angeles is a much more densely developed city, even though on first instinct people say, oh no, well, LA's big, sprawling, everybody on the freeway all the time and so forth. The thing about Portland is it's just simply a lot smaller community, and they drew a big old urban growth boundary way far out, and then that allows for just traditional kind of sprawling urban development. And Portland has some cool things like downtown and so forth. I mean, there's some stuff like that, but it is not really necessarily driven by the urban growth boundary. Okay, so just to be, so I mean, I've told you at different points along the way, sometimes what we're going to do in this class is look at actual facts and evidence and push on some assumptions that you make. I mean, I'm not at all critical of Portland or of urban growth boundaries or whatever, but I'm just simply saying what people think it does is not what it actually does. Okay, so you just have to kind of ask those tough questions and so forth. And that leads to the fact that as you deal with big box retail establishments, so that's another sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a type of development that can be subject to various kinds of growth controls, right? So local governments sort of think, hey, we want to figure out a way to limit these big box retail stores, right? And they'll say, hey, they kill off all our local businesses, our local retail stores and so on and so forth, and whatnot. They're big, they're ugly, they're very car-oriented, right? Everybody, right? I mean, when is the last time that you have taken your bicycle to Home Depot to pick up some lumber, right? Right? No, nobody doing that? Go do your shopping at Walmart on the light rail system? No, not doing, no, right, but you see what I'm saying? I mean, think about it, right? I mean, they're very car-centric, big, massive structures with big parking lots and so on and so forth. So sometimes local governments are aiming to rein them in, but the question is, what's the legitimate basis for doing that, right? It's a legitimate basis for doing that. So where local governments have aimed their regulations at particular types of retailers, with certain sales, for example, or certain amounts of inventory or whatever. What's the problem? Where do they get into trouble? It is the lack of a land use nexus, right? Okay, land use nexus is usually a good answer in this class. Okay, land use nexus, right? Does everybody see? Right? Okay, because again, it's aiming to regulate which retailers, not the land use impacts. So if they want to regulate the size of buildings, legitimate. They want to regulate the size of parking lots, legitimate. They want to regulate, for example, how much, of the big trucks with the delivering the inventory and how many trips per day or how many trucks or whatever. Okay, that's got a land use impact. That's legitimate. But if you're trying to design a regulation that says we don't want Walmart because we want Granny Smith's clothing store to survive and thrive, okay, that's basically anti-competitive, right? Right? Does everybody see that? That you're regulating the retail market as opposed to regulating the land use impacts. Does everybody see the issue there? Okay, so that's something that you want to think about. So undoubtedly, community members in your hearing, you're going to have people some people who love the idea that there might be a Weston Walmart, and some people who hate the idea that it would be Walmart, right? Okay, but if you are going to convince decision makers to deny the waivers that Walmart is seeking, it has to be on something other than Walmart is bad for our community. Does everybody see that? Why? Why?
Land use
Just
nexus.
next.
Yes, there's no land use nexus. Okay, right? Okay, so that is an issue to think about. Okay, so that's it for growth controls. We will now break into teams, take a break, and so forth, and I'm going to come around and talk to each team. Okay? And then we've got almost an hour. Communicate with them. And it should not be somebody on the planning commission, because again, that ex parte thing, it should be a staff person, planner, the attorney, whoever, somebody. Okay? But yeah, yes, sir. You have a question?
You answered it. I was gonna say, should our legal counsel reach out to theirs?
So you can, yeah. It's either way. I think usually in the real world, it's more often the planner who's assigned to sort of the case manager for the project, because what they're really interested in is all the planning details, right? All the design and the traffic and all that kind of stuff. But the lawyer can. I mean, it's either way. But generally, the commissioner shouldn't be engaged in a back and forth with the applicant. The information can be provided ahead of time by the applicant.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So when they're making their argument, the applicant, if we have a question for them, can we interject, or is that just at a certain time?
You can choose to do it however you want. You can ask the questions at the time as they go along, or you can let them make their presentation and then ask questions. Either way.
I think we already put that one on the agenda though. For the community, we can do it at any time, during or after, in between, or at the end. But for Walmart, we're gonna have a specific time set for you guys to ask questions.
So what are y'all doing in advance?
We're drafting rules and agenda, and we're gonna send that out to them tonight, and ask for input from both teams to see if we need to update anything.
Okay.
And the planning staff, which is Mark and I, are gonna submit our brainstorm our recommendations that we'll make to the commission.
Well, we need to look through the code and see
Yeah.
what goes against the code, what goes against the plan.
Okay. So
Can I ask you a real quick question before you, like, beyond what, in the files that you sent us, there's like the drawings. Is there anything else that Walmart submitted that we might be missing that we need to be looking at, like as far as their plans are concerned?
Well, I mean, again, if they make revisions or they add additional stuff, I mean, so you gotta deal with, the team that that's gonna be presenting to you, so they may have other things. So that's why you're gonna have to reach out and find out. But everything should be in all of those files, between, all of that. Everything is submitted, as far as I know. I don't know of any other sources, but but you saw both there was a separate file of drawings, but then there was also the application itself, right? So there's at least a couple different files.
So for that specific question time, is in the agenda or the hearings? Because I don't.
All right.
It's definitely in the agenda. I can't remember if it's in the rules.
Okay, so, you wanna ask them to have the smart board set up in
Because
there?
all I see is
And- but you-
30
I
minutes
mean, I
allotted.
would- If I were you, I would say he's sick and you need to come in.
I don't know if
Train
maybe
There's
seriously.
the other people who wanna do PowerPoints and stuff.
There is something in the rules about
Somebody
that we shouldn't interrupt them, but it doesn't particularly say.
Honestly, it's a little bit easier for a law
Yeah.
student to do that, because you're gonna be, it's gonna be, Lee or, Linda Porter or Jim Becker, that, and you just have to find a time to go in there and so forth.
Alright, yeah,
But
it looks like
they
Chris
took
took
all
it
that
out,
stuff
but I
out,
think
so
we're
we
gonna
have to
need
put
that
it
sign to put it
back
back
in.
in.
But Lee
It'll be,
has the syllabus, so he knows this is
It'll be
coming
right
up, which is-
between
Mhm.
presentation requests and
Yeah.
public forum. How much time do you guys want for that? That's a good question. I think we had 30 initially, but if you guys probably aren't gonna need quite that much, but I don't know.
30 minutes just for asking questions?
Yeah, probably.
That you,
We were being really broad the first draft.
Yeah, no. I can't, I don't know, I don't speak for everyone, but maybe like 10, 15 minutes. I mean, then if we don't use it all, then we can just, I don't think we'll need 30.
Okay.
I do think it would
all
be a
right,
good
so
idea
let
to
me
get,
ask,
for
okay,
like, just let them
okay,
go
I wanna
through.
go back to.
Yeah, they're 30 then you're.
You said
okay.
brainstorm. What exactly are you going to end up doing? What's the end result of planning staff's work?
Make recommendations to the commission.
What does that look like?
A staff report?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so I wanted to make sure, I mean, you're not just making some oral recommendations, right? You actually need a staff report,
Yeah.
right? And it's gotta have analysis, right? And in there, it's also gotta have what?
Findings.
Yes, findings, okay? And there's actually more findings than you might think that need to be made. So this is where your legal counsel can help you. Hello, legal counsel that's not paying attention. Oh, you're the legal counsel. I thought he was that. Okay. So you're the, all right.
But we're the.
Okay, so,
Then Walmart will
so you wanna see, you wanna make sure that you've got everything that has to be,
Well, yeah, after the.
all the findings that have to be made for the waivers. So it's actually, the waivers, they're actually, so they're seeking different waivers, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so how many different waivers are they looking at? What are the waivers?
There's certain,
The way I see it,
the-
Walmart is for 50.
I know there's 3, and then there's the alley closure we were just talking about.
Right? So what has to be found for the alley closure is different than, like, for example, the setback from the front, that's a different, right? You see,
Yeah.
there's some different standards there. And so you're gonna need a set of waivers for each and every, I mean, a set of findings for each and every waiver.
Okay.
And some of them are gonna repeat the same standards, okay? So some of them, the standards are different, but some of them, the standards are the same. But what you're assessing is gonna be different. In other words, whether it qualifies or not, you're gonna have to make separate findings for each waiver. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Right. So yeah, the legal staff and the planning staff really have to work together on this, because, that's how that report gets put together. You're gonna also have to make it available, right? So you're making recommendations to the planning commission, so the applicant needs it, but the other team the community team needs it too, right? They need to know what is it that you're saying, which then they might agree, or they might attack it, or whatever, but, it's not just for the planning commission members, but of course, you have to provide the planning commission members as well. And to me, okay, now that was the other thing, I need to tell the Walmart team that. But anyway, I cannot grade you unless I get each and everything that you use, okay? So if you're providing something to to the planning commission, or you're presenting something, if it's a PowerPoint, if it's a report, if it's a whatever, I need it. Your rules, etc. So you can send it electronically, give me a physical copy, I don't care. But
Is
I-
that just as long, is there like a certain date that we need to get that by? Obviously
Well, before
before it starts, but,
Well, I could- or at the end of, I mean, before I give you a break.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just,
Like
I need,
our breakdown of the
I need to
funds
be able to
as
see
survey
everything
Okay.
that was done.
Proposed map
That's not like your,
Yeah, those are like, those are the basic ones.
yeah, your
Yeah, those are just basic.
discussion notes among yourselves. I don't care, I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
That session
like,
governs,
how you're gonna put the staff, but just whatever you.
But like
produce.
agenda, hearing
Agenda, the
rules, status
the-
report,
Yeah, staff report, that kind of
staff
stuff,
report.
yeah.
And if there's something we're sending out to the whole class and we use Blackboard, you're part of.
If it's all users, I'm good.
Okay.
Yep, yep, so that's an easy way
Even
to,
217
for
governs
sure I'm
board
getting it. Just
adjustment,
all,
133
send email,
governs
all
planning
users,
commission,
it will
board
come.
planning
And
commission, board adjustment.
for planning commission, for the staff report, when can we get that? Or do we get that at the meeting, or?
Versus if you look at 217,
I think
that's the
your,
layout
I
of
think your
board's adjustment.
commissioners,
So which one are you looking
the
at?
applicant, and the community are all gonna need the staff
Yeah.
report ahead of time, to be able to read it and think about it and so forth, right? I mean, do you see where?
Mhm.
No, but an board of adjustment is
So,
who
so you
issues
have to think
variances.
about
That's why
what
it's
that's
called
gonna
a
be.
board of
And can we bring that with,
adjusting.
if we're part of the planning commission, can we bring that with
I'm
us
pretty
to
sure
the
a
meeting?
board
Of course.
adjustment
Probably you should.
is from planning.
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
What is the difference between the planning commission and the board of adjustment?
Okay, so the planning commission has responsibility for compliance with the plan. Okay, the board of zoning adjustment has certain sorts of, so they do conditional use permits, they do variances. This is a waiver, which is sort of like a variance, but because it's a waiver from the plan, it's actually decided by the planning commission. So there's something, okay, I'm gonna forget off the top of my head what it is, but there's something that it ultimately also has to go, so it's shared authority. Is that what you're asking about, there's something in there that then ultimately also went to the board of zoning adjustment, right? Is everybody, am I remembering that right? In this?
I think I was just confused as to, like, because
I think Walmart needed something from the Board of Zoning Adjustment. I think it's mentioned somewhere in there, but it was something minor, but that's not what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the waivers that the planning, the main things that were on the agenda for the planning commission to decide. I forgot what it was that they.
Setback
That is,
issue,
yeah,
a
okay.
setback issue in the back.
Right. So in other words, there was something that the planning commission did not have the authority to grant or deny, it went to the board of zoning adjustment. But it was a real minor thing, but the issue of not being up at the street and instead being back, that's an issue of a waiver from the plan, that's something y'all would decide.
Mhm.
So,
And so, as far as the traffic study, which we don't have access to, we'll just go by the conclusions, recommendations that are in their,
yeah.
in their report.
Yeah. I mean, I think the conclusions and recommendation of the report are pretty good. I mean, they're pretty adequate for giving you a feel for what the.
That's fine, what I'm saying is basically, I mean, I'm planning to literally copy this from
Oh,
the
yeah,
original
just,
staff
no,
report,
it's just copy and paste.
rather than trying to investigate.
Right, no, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, how could you, right? I mean, no, you
Right.
can't, just copy and paste. I mean, anything that's a fact that requires a study that you can't do, because this is a simulation, just copy and paste.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something, and again, I mean, I guess to be more precise with my question, like, in what form were these requests
Okay, so there's
made?
glass
In the
windows,
first-
there's building
I don't
entrances,
see that.
road
Like, I see the
closures,
staff
and there's
report that
setback
lists
slash
these
parking lot.
requests. When did Walmart send those in?
Those are the four right
Or
here.
or is this something that
Setback
the
slash
staff went back
parking
to
lot,
Walmart
road
with and said,
closures,
"Here's your
building
plan
entrance,
back,
and
here's
glass
what you-
windows.
Yep.
You know,
Okay.
here's where you're breaking the law.
Well, there was some back and forth, but are you on Glossary?
Yeah,
Okay, so go back to the list.
so I must be missing things, like you said.
Okay, so,
But
it's actually, I got you the other way. Okay. So, where's the rendering? There's applicant justification.
what we need to do, the rules,
Go to
Yeah.
that.
And then like setback.
Entrance somewhere else.
So there's their proposed findings.
This is, so this is from the regulations, so.
Setback is a
Yeah,
buffer,
and
basically.
then we do applications for waivers here.
Oh,
No,
no,
no.
Okay, all right, so we'll go back.
Yeah, this is the.
All right, so go back.
Yeah, those are the.
I'm
so
trying to
you
find a
can even, like,
wall
make a sheet
that
of paper that's
underneath
so
it
gives
gives
them-
them-
Oh,
Yeah.
development.
that allow them, that demand findings, I can't find it.
That's just the drawing.
All right.
And see, this is where I was confused, like, are we supposed to
Well,
start
that's-
from scratch and like going through every detail on this?
Yeah.
But you consider the procedure for amending
Yeah.
zoning, types of regulations, and there's
So that's the starting point.
That's-
They change it.
Where's the planning?
So now have to follow.
Yeah,
this.
okay, but it's
That would
actually a
be
pretty good
a-
one.
Yeah,
But.
Not a
but
zoning
when you- but see,
restriction, it
you
would
got
be a,
deliberation, right?
Mhm.
But you actually need to sort of think about how the vote is gonna go.
So
Okay.
I think, I think we talked about it, we
I
can
mean,
just put
actually,
it
I
in.
just don't.
So what do you think?
So,
I don't think
so
it's
how's it
ordinance.
gonna work?
You were gonna say it?
We're,
Like if you're
The
violating
voting.
ordinance.
yeah, we're gonna go waiver by waiver, and each one, we're gonna say this is waiver number one, and we're gonna ask all the commissioners to do their findings of fact one by one and vote as
No,
they,
no.
no?
Okay.
That's too much.
Okay.
I mean, that is, for one, it's very cumbersome, okay? So,
Waiver by
what
waiver.
you want is a motion that that is a motion to approve or deny for the
What
following
is that
reasons, and
section?
there's your findings, and then
Is
whoever's
that what
making
they're
the
asking
motion
for?
has to
Yeah.
state
They're asking
what
for
they
that
are.
one for sure?
Section number 5.
Of course, people can,
5,
other
6,
commissioners can suggest, here's some other findings that need to be, that we wanna make.
Said
or,
requested waiver
can
of section
suggest,
5.
either
5.6.
additions to the findings of fact or modifications. So,
It doesn't even
when people, might articulate other reasons.
Oh,
So
no,
basically,
that's an ordinance.
somebody needs to make a
Yeah.
motion.
So the
Yeah,
chair
that makes
should,
sense. So you're not
the
violating
chair should
zoning
basically do
ordinance.
the findings of facts
You're
with the
violating
motion, or,
Ordinance
No, that's not what I'm
isn't
saying at all.
legislatively
That's what I'm saying.
made.
So, somebody
it's-
makes a
it's-
motion
It's us made, so I mean, we
to
can,
approve
That's
the
not
waiver or
zoning.
deny the waiver
I mean, this is.
Okay.
for the following reasons. And then that
well, as
person makes
far as,
a
as
set
far
of
as I
findings of
understand it,
fact,
because like, I don't think that,
or
like,
proposes a set of findings of fact that matches that.
because I always thought zoning had to come out of those certain body. Like an
No,
ordinance, like,
I
hey,
mean,
if
so
you
the
use a
group, if the
particular
group
kind of
doesn't like those
wood or
findings,
something, is like.
they
it doesn't
modify
define
it, or they vote against the
The
motion,
planning,
right?
And then they say their reasons?
so the rest of the group doesn't have to do any findings unless they're specifically different.
They'll review and maintain
Alright,
the
so, in
2020
general,
comprehensive plan.
thing is,
including
findings are
recommendation
gonna kind of
and
go one way or the
implementation
other.
of the
There's either
plans
be,
the appropriate
you either have the findings that are necessary to support granting the waiver, or the findings that are necessary to deny the waiver, right? I mean, so you're, and it's gonna be, I mean, so, the group can say, I mean, like, somebody can say, well, before we vote, I think we also ought to find blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Okay. But, so people can add, but you don't have to have each commissioner go around and say, I make the following findings. No, it's
Okay.
just part of the motion, all right? You following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The motion needs a second, right? You can do additional deliberation. Why, so that, then people sometimes articulate, I agree with you, I don't. But usually by the time you've done deliberations, we've got a pretty good idea of, how
So
people are reading.
deliberations have already,
So this would
like,
be a
we've already
motion.
talked
Talk
about
about-
everything,
right.
and so then it's motion to,
Five,
for these
six.
findings.
Right, and so the motion needs to be, what the decision is, to approve the waiver or to deny the waiver. One or the other, right? And then the findings need to fit that, to what kinds of findings, right? But there can be additional, discussion or deliberation. And then the chair calls for a vote, and it's yes or no from each commissioner, right? Does that make sense?
So if I was just, Shelby's the planning commissioner and I'm part of the commission, I would say I would like to make a motion to approve
Yep.
such and such waiver for the following findings of fact. List my findings of fact someone would second it.
Second, okay.
He seconds it, and she would call the vote.
Right,
And then
you
we
wanna
go-
give it, you wanna give a
There's not a
moment for
single
people
mention of a
to
waiver.
weigh, you know, to make any further statements, like, yeah, I agree with that,
I
you
guess
know,
it
I
makes
think that's a
sense.
bad idea. I think these
Are
these
you in the land
additional
development code
findings
right now?
need to be
You got it.
added
So
to
there's a
it.
little bit of a gap between calling the vote
So
and
that's what I was
calling the
gonna say,
motion.
can I ask, before calling the vote, when he makes that motion and gets seconded, can I ask if there's any further discussion?
Yes, that's the best way to do it, just
If
any
no
further
one
discussion
seconded,
on the
then we
motion.
move to vote.
Yeah, exactly, yep, you do.
We should probably write that.
Or,
Yeah.
But
section
that's what I'm
9.
saying, is that's the piece that's
Point
missing
one.
from Pierce's,
There we go.
script, that
Provide
actually,
11.5.
you wanna make, because,
So I think
because
that-
this is the part.
No, I remember
that-
asking you about that last.
Well, what is, section 9.1?
Well, this is the part that, under the time
9
pressure,
point-
people kinda get
wait,
caught
where
up
is
in
it?
the moment, and you forget to
It's
do
a
the
big
right check.
whirlwind.
Huh?
Big
Chapter-
whirlwind, like,
Yeah,
all right,
exactly.
let's
I'm
vote.
not
Yeah.
sure how this
Yeah.
is written, but so it's like,
So, yeah, and, so,
so I'm not sure which one.
and so probably what you want is
This one's
each
findings
commissioner
necessary
to
for
vote yes or
granting
no,
legal
one by one, you know.
Yeah, okay.
So, I would just have a list. Who's taking your minutes?
Does that help?
Okay, so
Whatever.
you also.
Okay. I was gonna say, that's what I was like, I
Or
think
you
that's
need
where
to
we're
have
trying
an
to
official
go.
list
This
for
is
each waiver,
the,
and then you're gonna have,
Google
come
Maps,
up with the
information
motion
and
is,
bylaws.
and then yes or no.
Yeah,
And so the yes or no is with respect to the motion, so the motion might be
It's like
to
the
approve,
first two.
the motion might be to deny, right? So you have to write that down, but you want it pre-printed with who the commissioners are.
I guess we
You
use
see
this
that
one too,
makes
in
sense?
case we.
So that you can just record yes or no, and so then, I guess, Shelby
Oh,
will
I was
announce
like-
what the vote
Oh, yeah,
is, you
just
know.
chapter.
And, you know, we've had, I mean, it's been unanimous, it's been, 4-3, it's been 5-2 on this one, and, 6-1 on another one, and, it's been, over the years, it's been all sorts of things.
Does it just have to be majority?
Majority.
Let's go unanimous, guys. Sounds easier.
Chair's voting no. So you've got 7 of you, right?
One, well, we don't know if is Pierce gonna be there.
Make, we should have to make changes if we want.
If not, then
That just
I would be
might
the,
really
I would be the.
So,
Right now,
so,
though.
so you're.
Yeah, I mean,
Are you the vice chair?
No, I'm the chair.
Well, you're the chair now.
Yeah, Mr. Pierce, I was the vice chair before.
Okay, so you've stepped in, yeah, I suggest, okay, so you're now the chair, so you have 5 others plus Pierce, right? You, 5 others and Pierce, right?
Mhm.
Is there anybody who doesn't,
Okay, so everybody needs
I mean, so if Pierce can't do it, you can decide somebody else is the 7th commissioner, right?
Oh, just it.
So, but, I mean,
Okay.
now, it shouldn't be you
Oh, so
or
the
Joe. Huh?
So there's 3 people in the legal
Yes,
council.
one of the, but if Joe's the main,
Because our council,
You go to chapter 9, you said that
But,
are you the main lawyer?
yeah.
Okay, so then, yeah, so it's just, you can't be on the commission. But
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is Pierce can't
There was
come,
chapter 11 and
One or the
section 8,
other
and there
of
was
y'all can be,
9.1.16.
but not you, because you're doing
Chapter
staff
9.
report, right?
Oh, parking?
Okay.
All right?
So, yeah, we needed that. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
my own.